So, we now have the big reveal for you that we're very proud of, the exclusive unveiling of the FTE Next Generation Aviation Security Think Tank. Now, FTE is wholeheartedly committed to driving positive industry change, and a vital part of these efforts are our unique think tank projects, which bring together senior experts from across the industry to tackle key topics, co-create forward-thinking visions, and address common challenges. And we felt post-pandemic, and as we look forward, aviation security practices must evolve with that threat, and beyond a 20th century paradigm of security screening hardware that is largely unconnected, and which as a result does not fully leverage the power of technology. But we want to make some real recommendations on how that and more could change for the better in the not too distant future. It's been an amazing project and team to collaborate with, but I want to introduce now the woman who has captained this effort with such skill and grace. Anne-Marie Pellerin, the founder and managing partner of LAMLA, has over 15 years of diverse experience in the defense and homeland security sectors, and she combines strategic thinking and technical know-how to advise senior executives on some of the most pressing challenges and opportunities in aviation, transportation, and security, and has certainly been the glue that has held this effort together, for which I will always be very grateful. So let's give her a very warm welcome. She comes to kick us off. Anne-Marie, all yours.
Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, everyone, for coming after lunch. We're excited to be here today, and we want to talk a little bit about kind of what we've been up to, because in fact, this is not the first time that this group has met. We have been together on 3 90-minute sessions to prepare for today and to talk about some of these issues. So before I start, let me introduce everyone, and maybe if you could raise your hands so that the audience knows who you are. So first we have Ian Law, who's the Chief Digital Transformation Officer at LAWA. We have Matt Gilkinson, who's the Director of the Innovation Task Force for the U.S. Transportation Security Administration. Lisa Sullivan, Executive Vice President, Travel and Transport for IDEMIA. Tim Lorenzen, who is Senior Manager for Security Innovation with American Airlines. Bob Quick, Global Head of Airports for Amazon Web Services. And Joe Leader, the CEO of APEX and IFSA. So we have an outstanding group of professionals here today to talk about next generation aviation security. So what do we want you to take away with from this talk today? New perspectives. So hearing more about different types of screening that we can anticipate and/or security practices, approaches, capabilities in the future. Relevant examples from kind of the lives and experience of the professionals on this panel. A community framework, how can we better collaborate, public, private, and with the different professionals in this room and outside of it. And then motivation, I think that this is an extremely optimistic group, and we're very excited about the potential of where we could go to 2030. The topics we'll cover, security-related challenges, because obviously starting with the problem sets makes sense. Relevant tech advancements outside of the aviation realm, outside of security, that could apply, and then talking about accelerating progress to 2030. So some of the challenges that we're faced with currently. Limited space and passenger volumes back up. Clearly, this is problematic when you have limited infrastructure and you're trying to squeeze passengers for a limited space. We'll talk about how we're looking to address this in the future with new approaches and new technologies. Secondly, it's difficult to hire and retain officers in the security realm post-COVID. So how are we addressing this with new approaches to screening and moving some of our workforce to higher value and more impactful activities? Passengers feel powerless. It's tough to travel these days. Passenger volumes are up. We're still preparing for the future. In some respects, we're catching up, and we're trying to better communicate with the passenger community. So how do we improve that over time? And then finally, we have a fragmented intergovernment requirements kind of network. So in the United States, we have the advantage of having U.S. Customs and Border Protection and the Transportation Security Administration collaborating. But in other parts of the world, when passengers get on an airplane and they travel from one country to the other, it's very difficult to understand what the requirements might be and ensure some level of harmonization. What are some of the tech trends that we might see? And on this one, I'll hand it over to some of my panelists.
Thanks so much, Anne. And I think one of the things we talked about with all of this is trends are really key as we're looking at how are we going to address the challenges that we're going to talk to you about in just a few minutes. So, with the digital ID space, this is really a natural progression with a lot of what's going on. in the market. You have physical credentials, of course, from an identity standpoint, and all of us, I think, in this room have all interacted with some form of a digital identification at this point. And this is actually something that mirrors a lot of things that consumers are actually used to because of the advent of payment capabilities moving to digital as well. Other trends that we kind of discussed as a group with this is, we are making a lot of progress in the digital ID space because of standards. So there's a huge trend right now in pushing for standards, which helps promote interoperability and global harmonization. Things like IATA pushing for DTC standards, the TSA biometric roadmap that cites the 18013-5 as a standard for here in the US. These are all things that are going to help, from a trend standpoint, the adoption of digital identity. Other things that are helping this space from a trend standpoint are around smartphone usage. In the US, we have nearly 85% of Americans with smartphones. Rest of the world, it's only 70%, but this is something that's also really helping in this. But 97% of people actually own cell phones. So this is a huge potential for us as we're looking to a digital identity with the advent of access in the wallet. COVID was also an accelerator around digital identities as people were pushing to move to more touchless, and also a rise in fraud. We've seen sophistication and fraudulent documents, and this provides a huge tailwind for all of us from the security side to accept digital identities as it pushes back on this fraud risk.
Artificial intelligence and machine learning is a great topic, and we've seen incredible advancements moving away from just the kind of static models that artificial intelligence generated to generative AI that are actually generating new things, and moving away from kind of some of the STEM applications into some of the creative side. One of the things, all of these topics converge upon each other, and by having the connectivity in place, by having access to the data, you unlock the opportunity to apply an artificial intelligence and machine learning capability that wouldn't have existed previously. We've seen changes in passenger volumes and passenger trends. I think double-digit kind of changes in terms of increase in multiple people traveling on a passenger name record versus single travelers. That's down almost double digits pre-COVID, pre-COVID to post-COVID. And so within TSA, we've used artificial intelligence and machine learning with our vendors to enhance our on-person screening system, reducing the pat-down rate by 50%. Nobody likes to be touched, and we don't want to touch anybody. So that algorithm advancement is helpful, being able to do that. We're seeing the same thing starting to happen in the property space, where we're able to perform object recognition and move into the prohibited items detection space, hopefully getting to the point where we could do image on alarm only. The officers will only have to look at the images that have alarms and be able to resolve those, rather than having to look and search for everything in every single bag. So these are operational efficiencies that are going to help improve the passenger's experience. And maybe with that application of artificial intelligence, we can adapt to that changing passenger population more effectively and more efficiently.
We talked about robotics as well, and where it's being applied, and it's being less applied, I guess, mostly in the security realm. A lot more operational applications of it rather than just pure security-related ones. I think, even though we're seeing a lot of pilots of these or some pilots of these in the public areas of airports, airports are very cautious about their use because it's just a very, very complex environment. But we see a lot more in the control spaces, and we at LAX actually, some of our vendors use robots even for patrolling the car parks, and they can be applied to security needs. And I think to Matt's point, all these things are kind of interwoven. You have to kind of tie the AI, ML into the background of that to be able to say the robot's actually the thing out gathering the intelligence or gathering the information, and the AI, ML is creating the intelligence from it. And then a lot more operationally we see clearly on the air side, and I think there's a huge surge there, and there are working groups under other organizations too, like the ACI, just looking at the 5G requirements to be able to manage autonomous vehicles all the way down to robots on the air side, because again, it's a nicely controlled space and a bit easier to regulate. So much more to come in that area. I think it's new territory for us, but we'll certainly see a lot more in the next few years.
Yeah, and I guess the cloud really kind of underpins all of these technologies. The fantastic thing about the cloud is it really democratizes the technology and makes it available for everyone to use. So in the past, if you wanted to do something like computer vision or machine learning or AI, you had to go and buy all the servers and build them all. And if you want to roll it out to lots of airports, you had to get all this infrastructure and roll it out to airports everywhere you want to operate it. But now with the cloud, it really kind of democratizes that, and all those services are available just on demand. So it makes it much easier to build and deploy the technology. And it also makes it easier to sort of innovate and iterate. It's much faster to try out new things, and then if something works, you can very quickly scale it out to lots of locations. And then you can take those learnings and then continue to grow and continue to develop and iterate on the technology solution.
The race to 2030. So this group came together and we talked about, again, the problems, different tech trends that we're seeing, and then we came up with kind of different key concepts that we believe will move forward between now and 2030, and we're quite optimistic about where we'll be in 7 years' time. So the group here is going to discuss some of those outcomes from the discussions over the next 20 minutes.
Awesome. So one of the first ones we talked about was the distributed kind of touch point. And I heard someone say earlier on a US travel panel this year that we're really in this renaissance of travel. So not since kind of, in the last kind of centennial have we had this much change happen in the last decade with urban air mobility, VTOLs, Hyperloop if that comes back, and different just modes of transportation. And so with that multiple distributed touch point model, we've also talked about how the airport isn't necessarily just an airport in the sense it is today, but something that is serving multiple types of these different mobility options. And so with that, not only are consumers arriving to airports and traversing through airports with different means, but these touch points are also kind of starting to decentralize in the sense of someone's journey, and I think United mentioned this yesterday, moving left, starts much earlier. So it's not necessarily just when they arrive at the airport and are going through their bag drop-in and their checkpoint experience, but it starts when they're in downtown LA and getting on a helipad or a vertiport and taking into a flight and getting dropped off at LAX. So because of this now new kind of model on how things are starting to decentralize, we talked a lot about, how is this going to, how are we going to handle this as an industry? Digital identity is one of these things that can help provide interconnectivity and making sure that that person is the person through all steps of this travel and journey. But we talked about, how is this going to play in the security aspect of it? Are we going to have off-airport screening and, baggage drops? I think Austin Gould, who's sitting in the front row, mentioned that not sure if we're ready for that yet, but by 2030 we might have to be. So there's a lot of, I think, talk and debate of how we're actually going to move forward in these things around having a decentralized screening experience or having that, just have a much more seamless experience when you get to the airport so you don't have the bottlenecks that might exist today. We talked about the remote bag drops, also the ability to connect a passenger with their bags and so forth as a much more identifiable way to make sure no nefarious actions are taken if someone's dropping off their bag at a convention center and having it dropped off at the airport. We talked about, of course, some of the trends that are not just going to be in 2030, but are here today that TSA and CBP and others in the US market have invested in, where they're going to be accepting digital credentials and are accepting digital credentials at checkpoints. That's something that TSA, and Matt will probably hit on later, is being rolled out now. They'll have over 1,500 units in the next 12 to 18 months nationwide. That's going to allow passengers to use their digital credentials and have that much more seamless experience, not just there, but through their journey, whether they're doing bag drop, security, or boarding. And then just broadly, I think as we've talked about this, some of the challenges we see with this that we highlighted as well in the trends is we have to make sure that as we're rolling through all these things, we know there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all model per se, but we have to have interoperability, so standards are going to be absolutely key for us to all be able to have a different sized model, but have consistency in that process along the way. We've also talked about the importance of data concerns and protection of the data data, not just the consumer, but making sure that we, as people who are very mindful of security, are aware of what information we're getting. And then certainly the last is around the fragmentation of approaches. In the U.S., we approach it very much one way. The rest of the world might be different. And how is that going to be harmonized, not just in the U.S. model, but on a more global scale?
Thanks, Lisa.
And we learned a lot about security checkpoint lines, not from security checkpoints, but from coffee queues. And our coffee lines are probably worse than our security lines, so they were a good place to kind of go and start. And there's quite a lot to be learned there. I know my LAX colleagues will be just groaning at this, but there are a lot of lessons to be learned from what's happening, what the difference between mass production and mass customization, and how that works in the airport environment. And for example, we have our coffee is quite mass customization centric, but actually probably needs to be mass production centric for 60% of the people who are looking for coffee. So as we look at the security checkpoint, we also look at a mass production process and how that works, and how we ensure how we can see that any variety in that production process, and that can be the breaking down of something, by the way, suddenly throws the whole thing out of kilter. And lines can grow very, very quickly there. So maintaining that very, very consistent production process is really, really key. And in any mass production environment, factory environment, flow is important, consistent flow, consistent demand, and I think that's really important. I think our security lines, you wouldn't build a factory in the way our security lines work, because they get these spikes in demand and then it kind of falls to nothing and then it goes up to 100 again. And service ubiquity across the whole screening experience is quite important as well, to maintain that kind of production, sense of production. And so in the screening scenario, or in the checkpoint scenario, there are three kind of main processes. One is just preparing travelers for the process. And a few years ago, while I still worked at San Francisco, the TSA ITF piloted these standing totems, which I hear might be back. And these were fantastic at just getting people those messages in the line about preparing for going through the line. And we're certainly very keen to see those coming again. The second one is just that what the airport and the airline can do to support wayfinding. A lot of airports, and ours in particular, have several checkpoints that can get you to several different boarding areas, all within the same complex, as it were, the same series of terminals. So you can go in through Terminal 7, but go to a gate in Terminal 6. But we don't load balance between all of those at the moment. And I think, going back to my demand management point, I think there's a lot more we could do to kind of help load balance between them. And then also on the demand management side, we still have we're rolling out now from a pilot that's run for a year to the rest of the airport. We ran it in Terminal 7. The whole virtual queuing, the concept of people actually committing to a time and then getting a faster way through the security process. And that's phenomenally popular in all of the customer service that we do with people. And it's one that, as I said, we're rolling it out for the whole airport because it helps, and I think the TSA is very supportive of it, because as well it can help potentially just take the top off a potential spike that we might see coming in demand at the checkpoint. So I think that kind of working together is really important. The second point is just around verification. And again, in the United States, with credential authentication technology, the version 1 now going up to version 2. So we'll have more with biometrics and facial matching to driver's licenses. And also certainly in California and some other states as well, where mobile driver's licenses being rolled out. And so, we already are piloting this in two Californian airports. And fairly soon, mobile driver's license will be available in the Apple Wallet and the Google Wallet, and you will just NFC it to a Cat2 machine, and then go straight through without any discussion, hopefully, with the document checkers. And if we have that, we will then, in a few years' time, move to e-gates, and hopefully very many of those. And then we will just line up e-gates with screening lanes, rather than having this kind of hourglass convergence on the document checkers and then going back out to the screening lanes afterwards. And then lastly, there's the screening itself. And you know, over the last few years, we've had ASLs, the automated screening lanes, which have been very helpful in reducing some of the bottleneck into the process. I think that the rollout of CT scanners is very interesting. I think it slows down the process because it's a more complex, scanning is more complex to analyze. But I think with the opening up the screening machines to open source algorithms, as it were, and us being able to get more algorithmic screening in rather than just relying on agents for every aspect of the final adjudication, those throughput times will go back up again, or the times will come down, the throughput volumes will go back up, and we'll start getting a much faster process to go through because people will have to remove less from their bags, divest less as they go through. And also then there's the risk-based screening, which really with TSA Pre in the US we already do, but you know, that will start to become more prevalent everywhere where just the adjudication as to what type of screening you need will be made on the spot, and then you will just go through the appropriate process. All, I think, still within the banner of the kind of the mass production approach to it rather than the customization. So I think over the next to 2030, it's about consistency of operation. There's lots of new technology going into lots of different airports and lots of different lanes, but getting it common across this country, for example, and a lot of other regions will be really important. The tailored screening, as I mentioned a second ago, and also that where we have being better able to manage demand between load balancing between checkpoints and load balancing within checkpoints.
Great, thanks, Ian.
Ian, I always think it's interesting how passengers are so patient for coffee that costs so much, but when they come through a high-quality screening process that's embedded in the reservation, you didn't have to pay very much for it. It's unruly to
Give
wait
out
very
coffee.
long.
That'll change the entire
The whole
attitude.
thing, right?
Starbucks at the end of every security screen.
Now we're onto something. So within the automation space, I think what we see in 2030 is more automation. To talk a minute about that last bullet there, biometrics and digital identity, let me walk you through a little bit of the CAT process in case you're not familiar with it, because that's a perfect use case, in my opinion, of automation. We went from a manual travel document check, and what that means is in the US, we really care about tying the identity to the person that was vetted on the boarding pass. And so our travel document checker had to be able to memorize all the security features of all the different airlines they were servicing in their boarding pass. They had to memorize all the security features of the credentials as well, and they had to be able to authenticate both. The boarding pass scan gave them some digital certificate kind of authentication, but they were still doing a manual process on the credential. And then they were matching all of that demographic information together to make sure that passenger was who they were against the boarding pass print result. With CAT, we start that automation process. We automate the credential validation and vetting process. We don't need the boarding pass anymore because we use the demographics from the credential to run against secure flight and do a validation of that information. And if anything's wrong and doesn't check out, you go back to the ticket counter and get that resolved before you go through screening. If it's all checked out, then we validate the person. And CAT 2 gets us to the point where we can do that biometric authentication as well. We can do it one-to-one or we can do it one-to-many. All of those pieces are increases in security and automation of the physical process. Many cases, you know, the technology things that we're talking about really are automations of the physical process. And the more that we can have passenger transparency and awareness to those pieces and processes that you may not see anymore that are being automated, the better off I think we're going to be in terms of understanding the efficiencies that we're gaining, the security that's being maintained, and the privacy that's in place. From a digital ID standpoint, we worked really hard, TSA worked really hard with ISO on instituting privacy as a core component of the digital ID. That is provisioned to your device, and then it doesn't ping back to a database when it's used. You get to say where your digital ID is used, and the only thing that happens is a time to live is sent from the issuing authority to say that that credential is still good. But there's no central record or data library with every time that credential's been used. So from a privacy standpoint, really we stepped up the privacy. We also see wayfinding as an important piece. Ian, you talked about those totems. We love them. Unfortunately, TSA doesn't have the funding to be able to buy them at a large scale. We've incorporated it into our checkpoint design guide and encourage partners as they think about how they queue, as they think about how they talk to passengers and communicate, how we build that in. And there's even airlines that are looking at how you do augmented reality so each passenger gets a unique version of the message. That way you know where to go, and then you can start looking at load balancing. I mean, how many times do you go to a new airport and you're not really sure exactly what the layout is and which checkpoint you should go to, versus your home airport where you know where the secrets are, right? I know if I go here, I'm gonna get a little bit faster service. I know if I go to this door, I'll be able to take a shortcut. Automation will help us communicate with passengers, be able to increase the wayfinding and make it a more seamless process. So all of those things I think are important. Talked about challenges in the privacy piece, but the other one is that money piece I just mentioned. We don't have the funding on the government side to be able to adopt those things. And there's, I think, ways to do public-private partnership to incentivize outcomes. We've seen us move on our policy standpoint to outcome-focused compliance, where we set the goal and we work with industry to be really innovative about how they implement those controls and those regulations.
Thanks, Matt.
And that ties right into passenger education and empowerment. One of the things we really have to think about is this really begins and ends with every single customer, making certain that they understand exactly how to connect with new processes that are easy to understand. As you look at customers today, as they go through digital ID, as they go through, am I going to go through Clear, am I TSA Pre? They're very confused, and we need to make it much simpler for everyone as we go through this new era. There are some great emerging tech and processes that we can use, but one of the biggest issues is there's not very good interoperability across registration processes. As I went to the UAE, as I went to in the US and Singapore, I have registered my digital identity in so many countries, it's kind of spooky. And that's one of the things we have to address in our customer concerns, is we have to be serving our customers, not stalking them. And I really love the new dream for 2030 of free Starbucks based on your digital ID. So let's fund that. But going back to a more serious note, our vision for 2030 is robust education and empowerment for every single customer out there so that they get it and get it easily. We have a tendency to over-engineer passenger experience processes and think of them like engineers or government officials rather than how do we make this easiest and most friendly to our customers. As you look forward to 2030, I really see areas that will be digital identity zones where your opt-in is not clicking a button every single time, but you're selecting to go through the lane where your face is your ID and you're able to simply walk through. That's what our customers expect, and that's what we should be working towards. If you are, I was speaking on a Lufthansa Flying Lab flight here, and if one of the things that could happen is if you're in Germany, which has much more stringent data protection privacy rules, then go through the area where you will not be biometrically identified and make sure that your customers know that you are serving them, not stalking them, and that there's always a way to opt out. The challenges around data privacy concerns are real. The one thing that I'm most concerned about is we see in a non-digital ID age, we see so many people that are constantly having their valuable data stolen from different sets. We need governmental level security everywhere, and this needs to be purged immediately after a mathematical check so that we don't have pieces of digital IDs out there everywhere to be taken away from us. And then the other element is this fragmented intergovernmental approach. All of us, when we talk about the 5 Eyes that cooperate quite a good deal, I'm amazed that my TSA PreCheck or my global entry does not get me into Canada, the UK, Australia. Really, it should get me into the EU. It should get me into many, many countries. We need to make this seamless. We need to make it so that if I am trusting a government, I am genuinely trusting them. I know there are some intergovernmental concerns because we don't want for a new identity to be implanted in someone else's database. But at the same time, this is about serving the 99.9% of customers that we know and trust, and watching for the 0.1% where we're like, is that a real person? We've never seen them before in this lifetime, and that doesn't match what we have. There are good ways to do checks that are intelligent and really well thought out, and we have to make it seamless.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, so everyone loves self-service technology. You know, we've got self-service check-in, self-service boarding, and the one area where we don't have self-service is the security screening process. And you know, study after study has shown that passengers generally prefer a self-service option. So I think Anne-Marie mentioned we're an optimistic bunch, and we felt that some form of self-service security screening was realistic by 2030. I'm curious if the folks in the room, hands up, anyone who thinks that we'll see a fully self-service security screening by 2030? Okay, not bad.
We all do.
Yeah, none of the panelists
we do,
put their hands up. Yeah.
From a TSA perspective, maybe later this year.
Yeah. So no, all the technology is there. There are companies who are investing in the self-service security screening pods. All that technology is being proven out. The biometric technology is there. We've got innovations around computer vision that can better monitor the process and make it more streamlined. So really, the tech is there. It's, I guess, you know, proving out the technology and then getting the rest of the process in place to support that. We've talked a little bit about you know, educating passengers and the passenger education process. And that's one of the barriers that the industry has found over the last 20 years of doing self-service is, you know, the first time someone goes to a self-service kiosk for check-in or for bag drop, it's confusing and it's difficult. And I think like self-service boarding, we've totally nailed as an industry. You walk up and it's just purely facial biometrics and it's completely intuitive. So I think that the trick with the self-service for passenger security screening is to make it be a very natural and a very intuitive process. And we also need to make sure that you know, data protection and data privacy and security is built into it, so people actually trust the system, they trust sharing their data to use it, and they trust that it is safe and secure to go through that process. But in order to make it work, I mean, if you think about an existing security checkpoint, you need to kind of compress all of these different functions into a single automatic system. And that requires data sharing from the airport with the airline and with the security screening agency. And not just in the US, where there's fantastic collaboration across the organizations, but thinking about rolling this out globally, we really need to come up with, you know, some kind of system or standards for us to share data around the security screening checkpoint.
Thanks, Bob.
Bringing it home with the last slide here, folks. Okay, so opt-in accelerators. So when we look at the ecosystem, I'm going to be repetitive here because some of my thunder got stolen by Joe and others. So I mean, really,
Damn it, man! I went with the coffee.
really, excellent. No, you know, sovereign IDs, right? And then the other thing is one-stop security, which is really these are ways that we can, in the short term, right, have wins and really work and focus on what we can do now in the ecosystem. I think it's important, and that's kind of enumerated on the slide with the challenges, is not to leave people behind in that space. And so standards are important. I mean, I think it's been said over and over again. Even, you know, mobile ID standards in the US, ISO, and using that as well, so that there's frameworks in place, and as things develop over time, that we are able to keep people in our ecosystems and able to use their IDs, and as Joe so aptly put, like not have it just poof, disappear on you.
Yep.
Great, thanks, Tim. So those were some of our findings from the group. We wanted to kind of open it up for discussion. I first have a few questions to ask of the think tankers, and then I will turn it over to all of you to ask questions of everyone up on stage. So the first piece is we're talking about aviation security, and obviously a key piece of building approaches for the future is based on threat. So threats are evolving, and you know, we've seen this post-pandemic, and we're thinking about this as we move forward into the future. And so Matt, it'd be great to hear from you in terms of how TSA is thinking about threat evolution and how some of these practices will kind of align with that.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things with the artificial intelligence and machine learning, the application of advanced algorithms, is we hope to be able to unlock kind of the key potential in being able to be more adaptable on the go, if you will, as we process. I think, you know, as we drive the connectivity of the systems, we'll be able to have updates being made to those systems. We're making massive investments in the computed tomography systems that get us 3D images, full scans of everything that's in the bag. We can electronically remove components from the bag already to take a closer look at those items. And I think all of those things allow us to be a little bit more adaptable and ready for threat. I think there's another threat in the security space that, you know, we talked about identity, right? How important the identity is to the security process. Fraudulent documents is really a big topic. Microprinting and all those kind of abilities to be able to print documents. The human eye just can't get some of those things. And so we've worked really hard to up our game with the credential authentication technology deployments, but also with the deployment of the digital ID. We really think that's going to be the biggest pathway forward. It gets you a contactless and seamless experience, but also it amps up the security completely.
Great, thanks, Matt. When we think about all of the technologies and tech trends that we've seen, obviously it's really interesting to hear from an airline stakeholder because you are a regulated party by the US government, for example, in the United States, and you're trying to kind of balance operational efficiency with risk mitigation and compliance activities. So out of all of the different things that we've talked about, which one do you think, Tim, is probably most urgent for you as an airline to put in place?
Yeah, so there's a lot of evolving technology being placed at the checkpoint and working with our TSA partners and others and airports. One of the big things is obviously, like CT is advancing and it's here. And it's being leveraged and it greatly enhances aviation security. But as Matt mentioned, there's a lot of work around, image on alarm only, things that kind of facilitate throughput in that space that are important to us. We definitely want to enhance aviation security. We're all stakeholders in this ecosystem and we take it very seriously to be security partners, but we also want to facilitate throughput of our passengers through checkpoints. So wherever there's opportunity to do enhancements and make things more with other aspects, machine learning and AI and things that Matt mentioned, we're very interested in that. We definitely look forward to enhancements in that area.
Great, thanks, Tim. We've talked a lot about identity verification in the context of aviation security. Identity verification in the context of aviation security actually is only really relevant in several countries around the world. Identity is used by customs authorities for admissibility purposes, but in the traditional aviation screening domain, often in certain countries, your ID is not even checked. So that shows that there's kind of a lack of harmonization of approach in terms of how screening is done, which from a security standpoint is probably good, but in some instances it's very confusing for the passenger. So Bob, how are we going to deal with this going forward? How can we drive some level of harmonization among different stakeholders?
Yeah, I think the first thing we need to do is to just improve the sort of leadership between our different organizations. And this think tank is a great example of that, everyone getting together and really thinking about the passenger experience and what the passenger experience is like. And then how do we sort of educate the passenger as they go through their journey. And then how do we safely share data between our organizations in a way that's kind of trusted by the passenger. I do think it comes up a lot, sort of data sharing, and it just sounds a bit scary, data sharing, because all my information will get everywhere. And really we need to think about it in terms of what information needs to be made available to the different organizations to do their job and to inform passengers, ideally on an opt-in basis, that this information can be shared between the different organizations. And then, standards are also a factor, and it does help to have standards to lean in on. But I also find that standards can also be kind of used as an excuse not to innovate. In other words, we'll go and we'll innovate when the standards exist, and until they exist, we won't do anything. So I think in the meantime, we very much need to sort of experiment and see what works and see what we can do together. And then as we learn, we can help then inform a standard that can be used to scale our learnings. But I think it's really important that we continue to, again, collaborate, see what information we can share, and then build out solutions that will improve the process, and then scale that through standards and through further automation.
Thanks, Bob. Over the last 48 hours, we talked a lot about biometrics and identity authentication, and it's obviously a hot topic, and I think everyone is quite bullish on where we're going to go between now and 2030. It feels also, to your point earlier, that we've really accelerated things over the last couple years. So what do you think, Lisa, is driving all this?
I mean, I think it's honestly what Joe was saying. It's no longer just about using biometrics and identity verification as a security means, but it's security and the passenger experience. And those things go hand in hand. I think before there was always a talk of, it's security first, and that was it. And now it's security and passenger experience are hand in hand, with the biometric element being something that we can use together as an industry to improve the passenger experience, like it is in, I think, Europe is one of the points you had made. So I think as Joe mentioned, as long as we keep that human kind of in the loop, the the customer experience at the heart of it, biometrics is going to be a huge enabler for a lot of the things that we've been talking about. So whether we have a decentralized checkpoint or a centralized checkpoint or a Joby, landing at LA to traverse me into my flight in a sterile area, that's something that can be an interconnective piece for the passenger to have that more seamless experience. But it is, I think, just the table stakes, right? We all have to do it, and then it's with the standards and everything that, that Bob just mentioned about how that works across borders and so forth as well.
Thanks, Lisa. We've talked a lot about data protection. Cyber, I think, is a key element of that as well. And so, Ian, as an airport stakeholder, when you think about passengers giving up their data to go more quickly through processes, how do you think about protecting their data and mitigating cyber risk?
I think regulation has helped a lot over if I think back a few years at these conferences, we used to have people talking about what a great idea it would be for your face to be the thing you could use to buy duty free. And we seem to have gone away from that with GDPR, CCPA, and all the other regulations that have come along. So, and I think particularly in this country, what's been really helpful is the DHS has taken on that role in a lot of cases, and now we use traveler verification system for biometric exit, for example, to send information to the government, and the government comes back and says yes or no, or comes back with the token, and then you carry on going. So I think establishing the model under which you want to work and making sure that kind of the players have the right incentives and are doing things for the right reasons, and are clear on why they're doing what they're doing, and what they're doing. Is really important, and I think I think Bob picked up a lot on the privacy side of this as well. But on the cybersecurity side, that's a bigger concern for me, because we're having these great conversations about all this extra technology we're going to be sticking into airports. But I hate to be the boring one, but in there somewhere there's an operating system that needs to be patched, and there's going to be more and more and more of them. And how do you manage across that in a very complex ecosystem or stakeholder environment like an airport where lots of people have different bits of it? And as we look just more broadly from just security within our own airport, we have defined into our data model environment a health domain, which is the health of the environment we're actually operating. So all those feeds that we're getting, are they just quiet, or are they broken? All these systems we have, are they compliant already with cybersecurity requirements, or are they not? So I think that need for this kind of cross-stakeholder way to clearly monitor all of these things is going to be really important in the future. It's going to be a big stretch, though, and it also needs the cloud environment to do it. There you go.
Great. Thanks, Ian. So last question before we turn it out to the floor. We've talked a lot about kind of multimodal in this context. Joe, I haven't asked you a question yet. We see kind of the face of aviation changing with urban air mobility and eVTOL. In your view, how is that going to kind of impact the different processes like security that happen in our commercial airports?
It's a great question. I want to make sure this is the last question because I don't want to steal Tim's thunder.
Oh, we're good. We're good.
So, in terms of eVTOL, I think we're going to, it's going to be almost like a private aviation play in that you're going to have, it's not going to be the same level of security. Most people don't realize in the United States we have Part 135, including Part 135, Part 380, which means that customers can be on an aircraft up to 30 passengers and not be required to go through normal TSA security screening. Well, how is this successfully done at companies like JSX, where they're using next generation technology that is highly sophisticated, as we were talking about, like what we want to use in the airport to improve the passenger experience? I could see that becoming part of eVTOL, and then also making it so that as we go to urban air mobility, then we have a different type of security that we migrate towards that makes it a unified and even front for all. Right now, it's a little bit weird that I can go through a security process that is quite rigorous, quite solid, but does not involve TSA officers. And I can't do that in any other normal environment with a 40-seat aircraft. So I think we need to improve the processes so that it's easier for passengers and keeps their security up to not let our defenses down whatsoever, but we need to move towards next generation technologies that make it easier because it will be multimodal, and we don't want there to be a weak point in the system.
Right, which ties to some of the efforts underway today of being screened at one airport, being securely bused to another airport, and how you can drive that connectivity across locations.
That's
awesome.
it.
Thanks, Joe. So I think now we're going to open it up to the room in case anybody has questions of the panelists. I think we have around 13 minutes left. So does anyone have questions?
Oh, please be brave. I gave the coffee idea. No, it wasn't mine.
No questions. Well, I'm going to kind of hang on to one of the topics that you raised, which is one-stop security. We've been talking for decades about equivalency of security measures between and among different operators and countries in the world, so that you actually can be screened in one location, fly to another location, not have to be rescreened, neither your person nor your accessible property. We've had some challenges in reaching that objective. It feels like there are things underway that will accelerate progress. So I think Matt and Tim specifically, what are you seeing in the one-stop security kind of technology and process acceleration process that's going to help us get there?
Yeah, so I mean, from a TSA perspective, we have congressional authority to run pilots in that area now. And so we're actively working with international partners to identify airports to be able to be considered for the one-stop process. We've got a process identified, we've got the security protocols and kind of expectations there. It's gonna take some technology deployments in the case of our international partners. And it's really not just very simple, right? In the United States, we have TSA, and we operate, regulate and operate the security. Internationally, if you didn't know, you've got airport authorities that are regulated by the government. Sometimes you've got two regulatory authorities in the case of the UK, where you've got Department for Transport and the Civil Aviation Authority. So you got to have all these stakeholders in the room to have a conversation about that one-stop kind of connection. And right now we're looking at city pairs to be able to do that, which takes the airlines, both domestically and internationally. And you got to kind of get all those pieces block and tackled together. We've got a schedule in place. There's process in place to have, I think, about 12 sites that have been selected. 6 maybe that are the authority, and we pick so many because everybody's going to be moving at an event-driven schedule, right? There are milestones they've got to achieve, and once they achieve those, then we can move forward with each of them. And so as we do that, it takes that partnership between TSA, CBP, looking at passenger flow and how we'll be able to move folks within the airport. But I think we've got real good momentum and real progress being made. Parallel to that, there's also an effort with TSA and international partners to fully harmonize and standardize on the detection side. I think that's a longer kind of a process because we'd have to update the detection capabilities both domestically and internationally, but we've got real traction in terms of getting the alignments there on exactly what we're detecting, looking for, and looking to prevent in the space.
Great.
I'll just, to add what Matt said, I mean, it is a partnership, right? It's going to take a lot of coordination between a lot of different stakeholders, and we're here for it. We have some great partners in our government agencies in the United States, CBP and TSA and others overseas. So, I mean, it will take a partnership, but we're getting traction. So.
Great, thanks, Tim. One of the key challenges that we've had over the years as well is moving to networking of equipment across the country and even in airports overseas. In the US, it's called STIP as a program. So, one of the things that I have been very optimistic about is Cat2 and networking of those systems. So I think it, could potentially pave the way for other goodness in the aviation security networking domain. So maybe Bob and Lisa, if you could speak to that and kind of globally how you could network all these systems to glean better data and help us move forward.
Yeah, sure. I'll have to go first. I think that sort of the mental model of networking data implies like all this data is kind of randomly flying around the world. But really, it goes back to it's information sharing under quite controlled and quite specific circumstances. So if you want to share an image, for example, from one screening location to another, it's about sharing that particular image between two defined points. And also there's I guess, a concern that if you've got two organizations, like let's say two different security organizations, two different national security organizations, how can they share information without maybe exposing or inadvertently sharing the underlying data, which is a real concern. And we do have this concept in a solution called data clean rooms, where you can put your data in what's called a clean room. So you put your data in the clean room, and only you can access the data. But someone else can run an algorithm on that data and then extract the information that they need. So it's a very secure and safe way for you to share data. So really I think the mental model is around sort of information sharing between organizations rather than sort of networking this whole sort of grid of information kind of flying around.
Yeah, I think just to tie onto that as well is it's less about the hardware, and I think it's more about the information that is being shared and so forth. But also just, you know, one of the basic things that we all have to deal with is the network connectivity, right? So that's one of the biggest challenges we do have today is, you know, if something goes down, it's not always the piece of hardware that's having a challenge. It is that, you know, network connectivity. So as we're starting to move to more resilient networking, if we're able to move to more cloud infrastructure, that enables as a layer all of this information to be shared to allow us to all kind of operate more effectively. There's been other organizations and industries that have actually done, you know, just as Bob described, where they're actually sharing information and collaboratively making decisions off of it. Airlines actually do it today in air traffic flow management on the ATC side. Airlines do it in the aircraft certification process when they're working with the size, different aspects on the FAA side. So all of these kind of models exist today, both in real time and post-ops and everything else. It's just about, I think, the underpinning of putting the right standards in and organizations like TSA and others getting the funding they need to have that underlying infrastructure to interconnect all these things. I don't know if you have other points on that.
I think the mission drives the connectivity. You know, Cat 2 is connected in the environment because it is required to perform its function. It cannot perform its function without the connectivity to secure flight, period. And so what we've been trying to do ourselves is tie that mission requirement to the other parts of the screening system where they can't operate without the connectivity. Because until we do that, it's still probably more cost effective, if you will, from a risk perspective, to have somebody physically go around and touch each of those systems. With our new CIO, Yemi, on board and his work to change the culture of the IT organization, we're seeing an interest in trying to be able to, you know, connect those equipment components, be able to monitor what operating systems are there, as Ian said, and make sure that the patches are being put in place and make sure that we're actually getting the connectivity. And I think it's the mission that drives it. Same thing with the data sharing. You know, there's a mission need to share that information across and be able to increase the security.
Great, thanks, Matt. I think we talked a lot about some of the great change that we've seen in our sector, and one of the things that stands out for me, you know, the administrator of TSA in 2007 went up to the Hill and asked for funding for automated screening lanes to go with X-ray units, and he was told that has nothing to do with security. Now you have very broad support across congressional stakeholders and the federal government to actually combine systems and look at facilitation as a component of security, which has been really a sea change in how we look at aviation security in the United States and elsewhere. One of the other changes I want to talk to you guys about and hear your views is this whole move from governments levying mandates to do better security and instead turning that on its head and incentivizing stakeholders to do better security and coming up with incentive models. That's something that I think has really changed in the last 5 years, and it'd be great also, Ian, perhaps as an airport stakeholder with private partnerships and buying equipment and gifting it to the government and other similar models to find incentives there to work better as a community that we're seeing.
So Ian was buying equipment and gifting it to the government. Did you pick up on that?
I was going to say no is the answer. No, I think the point though is a good one. Is that we're all trying to go to the same objective, and it's about kind of finding out who can carry the ball the farthest, the fastest. And I think what's been very helpful, certainly in this country with federal government, is the fact that we've been able to sit down and just work those things out. And it's not been, by any stretch of the imagination, easy. It's been very, very difficult at times to actually get kind of the ground rules in place and, you know, and actually write the check and do whatever we're going to do. But I think there's a great kind of coalition of the willing at the moment when I see everything that's going on in you know, both with the TSA, ITF in this country and just the general desire to make the thing better. And I think people are going a long way in rethinking their way of doing things to accommodate, a better environment. And it's funny, in the last point you were making about the networking, I was thinking that the checkpoint had no network in it 7 years ago, maybe, thereabouts. The check-in desk had lots of it, but the security checkpoint had none. It was a Desco machine, which was download with an RS-232 of the flights of the airlines that flew out of that went through that checkpoint, the passengers for the flights. And it was security screening machines were updated with a disk because there was a mandate not to network them because it was risky. And now we're going to this, totally different model where we're now pumping lots of network into it. So for us, for example, designing new terminals, when we're now thinking of the checkpoint, we're thinking of it as a highly networked environment. 10 years ago, we probably wouldn't have been.
Great.
From an incentivization perspective, let's talk internationally. I mean, the Department for Transport in the UK has done an incredible job at harnessing the power of an incentive with the push to computed tomography. They've basically been able to say, if you want to allow a 1 liter liquid to stay in the bag of a passenger, you'll deploy CT. And it's happening. And they're not having to expend the DFT funding, or they're able to accelerate that upgrade. In the United States, we have the capability acceptance process. There's a couple of the folks from our team out here, and we work really hard to enable airports to be able to donate that equipment that they want in order to kind of harness that kind of future forward-leaning capability.
Great, thanks, Matt. So Joe, I think you've looked at kind of airports and aviation and the experience more broadly, and obviously we're very focused on kind of security detection, identity verification. You talked a little bit about putting the passenger back at the center of the process. Where do you feel like there are other touch points in the broader passenger experience that we could do a better job at kind of tying into security, where there's cross-pollination opportunities?
It's a great question, because we have such an opportunity as we look at generating the next type of security for our customers of using it in many places. As we went through the pandemic, one of the ideas with Clear is using that digital identity, for example, for purchase points. We have that with the Amazon Go store, like you're being biometrically tracked throughout, as we've seen downstairs on the FTE Global show floor. So it's really important that we think about how we can use this technology to serve and serve and serve our customers throughout the journey that makes it easier. God bless the day that I can actually leave the airport and my face will allow me to pay. And maybe that's initially a lane while the idea takes off. But that's what we should be getting towards. We've run away from it too quickly. There was this spookiness when Facebook was auto-tagging us, and we were pretty much like, oh my God, any photo of me online will be automatically identified always and forever. But when it comes to, we're all using Face ID on our phones. We're all okay with tapping things. We should become okay with using our identity in other places, because it will accelerate every part of this process, serving rather than stalking.
Great, thanks, Joe. So with that, I think we're almost out of time, but what I would like to say is thank you to everyone who participated in this effort over the last couple months. We have put together the PowerPoint presentation into a deck that I think Daniel will distribute, which he'll probably talk about now.
Yes. Well, let's give him a big round of applause for that participation.